Hello. Hello, welcome one and all. Sorry for the late start this morning. We're a minute over, just getting a few technical issues sorted out this end. But we're glad to have you all with us. I see some more people are joining the room. Fabulous. Okay. So, we are going to start the session this morning. Let's run through the introduction. Kim is just sorting out a few camera and audio issues. She may need to leave and join again. I don't know quite what's going on, but we will certainly work through that. Let me share my screen and I'll take you through the first part. Now, I worked out how to share my screen. Oh, sorry, I should have had my phone off. Anyone know anyone from Moldova? I don't know. Let's share this screen. Okay, welcome. Can everyone see my screen okay? Lovely. Okay, welcome. This is session 6. We are literally in the last phase, the last sprint of our session to sort of over these 8 days. And really, we're starting to think about bringing it all together into that team dynamic. We've looked at ourselves and our role. We've looked at how we are positioned in the organization. We've tried to understand how to communicate and work with those, not only that we ourselves report to, but also those that report to us. And alongside that, of course, working with others and how we do that. So today we're going to expand on that a bit more, and we're going to understand the team dynamics. Now, some of you may have heard of these things. We're going to look at ideas such as the forming, norming, storming, and that sort of level. We are also going to look at the characteristics of the team and also the sort of the dysfunctions, how it can go slightly wrong. Here we go. And also how we've talked a lot about and spread this throughout situational leadership. So how do we now apply it to a team as a whole? How do we identify where the team is at and how we can do that with a team, which is why we will go through that initial piece around the storming and the stages of the team. We do like to start and end on time. I know we were a minute late today, but we'll make it up. It will be absolutely fine. And we hope today's going to be a really great session of lots of engagement with each other, a few case studies, and a bit of discovery. Please, again, if you can, unlike me with my phone going off, be present. Let me just check. It is on silent, it's all off. But please be here. Switch everything off. It's an hour and a half. Put aside the worries of the day and just sort of engage. This is your learning time. This is your space, your own area. Cameras on where possible. I would love to see your faces and just really engage with you there. And finally, if you can also update your name tags. Remember, you are going to be going into those breakout groups often. And as much as I'd like to say we're a small enough group to remember each other's names, it's not always going to happen. If you're like me, the memory of a goldfish. So having name tags is always good. And finally, if we are going too fast, please do tell us. Okay, so as I said, we've looked at a few things over the past couple of days, and we've been leading up to this idea of the team. Because even if you have a single report, you are still part of a team anyway. So you need to be able to understand how that works, whether it's a wider team or a larger team. And everything, all of those sort of, what we've built up to now is a toolkit. The communications, the feedback, or how to motivate, all of those aspects are all part of a toolkit to then being able to recognize, which is what today is, where your team or your direct report is, and being able to apply them, which is the key. Because it's very well having the toolkits, but if you can't identify where your report is or where your team is at, then you won't know which one to apply in that situation. This is where we're at with that, sort of where we get to today. So I am going to ask Kim, is she there? Are you there, Kim? I see Humantum Learning 2 is in the waiting room. Yeah, let's see. I'll just give her a moment. Kim, are you around? No. Okay, right. We will. I don't think her audio is working. I think everything has crashed for her. So let's start. Let's go straight into building team dynamics. So, one of the things that we need to understand is that whilst a team is built up of a group of individuals, what we hope is that we have a common goal and that we are working in somewhat as a unit. We can't forget we're individuals. Look at this picture. There is so many unique and diverse sort of people within this, and we while we recognize that there is something to being a team and working together, but all of these aspects of that individual create a dynamic within a team, and actually they can lead with personalities, with styles. With We talked about working styles. Remember we said about understanding your boss and understanding your direct report. They can actually affect the dynamic of that team. And so we need to understand how that all works together. Bruce Tuckman laid out a number of stages, which I sort of alluded to in our beginning, around a sort of life cycle of a team. So you've got all of these individuals, they're making the team up, and then they need to move through this journey together. Now, imagine the best thing to do is to see it as a project team coming together, because actually, usually that's a new team. If you're on a project, there may be some that have worked together, but it's a newly formed team. So let's have the project team as our example. And they've all come together. They're not strangers. There's a few that are sort of at different stages. Some know each other well, some don't. It's sort of a mix. And there's 20 of you, and you're all together. And you might greet each other. You're a bit sort of polite. You've not worked together very often. And so you start the stages of development. The first stage is the forming. So it seems that everyone is getting to know each other, but there's sort of this unsurety around you. This is sort of discovery stage. You are looking to one another and trying to understand what. Do you remember the career development? What makes that person tick? What is their intention in the group? Why are they there? How are they going to work with me? Do I know them well enough? Am I going to get on with this person? You're forming this team, you're getting to know each other, and you're starting to create that. So then the storming. Now, you start to come along, you get a new manager into the group, or the project manager, if we're going to go with the project idea, has come along, and they sort of take over and they take charge, and they've walked in, and this is it. We are going to bring about, you're going to lead the project. I've come in, I've taken over. Everyone just listen to me. And see what I need to do. And there is this moment where actually you do need to take charge. You do need to own the group. You need to be able to take them through this. Then we move on to something called norming. So you would say, in this instance of a project team, you've outlined the project. You've then looked and said, okay, someone in the group says, let's suggest some ground rules, how we're going to do it. The racy, I mentioned that. We're going to look at where people are coming. So we're starting to normalize what the dynamics will look like on the team. Who is responsible for what? Who is owning what? And this has come because someone has come in, laid out the task, and we're sort of getting to that stage. And you begin to need to understand, be a bit more calm around each other. Then we move on to performing. This is where the task has come along and you're a bit more open with each other and you work together. You get that task done through communication, through feedback, through all of those tools we talked about. You are performing as a team. There is one stage missing from here, and it's the morning. Now, I don't mean afternoon and morning, I mean the sadness, the grieving, the mourning. And this is when a team comes to an end. your project team. I've had this experience. I was on a project with a few partners. It was a sort of consortium, and we actually had a leaving party in the end because we'd spent 2 to 3 years, about 3 years with each other. And actually it was a bit of a mourning because we felt like we were not just losing the work, we were losing our sort of camaraderie, the banter and the thing. So when projects come to an end, there can be mourning. I will say this, if you are on a team where someone leaves, you will go through that mourning stage. Obviously, unless they were a disruptor in the team, you may feel relief. But if they were someone you value, be aware that those on the team will be mourning the loss of that individual. So they will struggle with that. They will go through that phase, as may you. So these are your sort of key areas: the forming, the storming, the norming, and the performing. And of course, as I mentioned, the mourning. Does anyone have any questions on this particular section? There's a lot to digest here. We're going to get in groups in a minute, but I'd like to open up. Zainab, yes, please do.
So I see that when the team is initially formed, and as you said, the second stage is when a project manager comes in, and then eventually they move on to the norming. So we'd like to talk, can you tell me a bit about why this forming and norming seems to be almost on the same plane?
Well, that's a good question.
I think that's just a visual thing.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think, I wouldn't read too much into, I have seen this laid out in different ways. I've seen this in the bell curve as well. We chose this. Maybe it was misleading. I actually think that and Kim, maybe this is something we need to look at in the things, but I've seen it done in steps. So okay. I've seen it done as sort of, and I think if I go to this one, so I've seen it done in stages.
Yeah,
you can see
so
here.
If you go back, Judith, I think the primary point is that dip, because there will be a dip, and oftentimes we don't recognize it. We think we're going to put people together and it's just going to be a linear progression towards towards group cohesion, and it's not. There's oftentimes when you get a lot of personalities together, it takes a while, and the productivity can dip, the morale can dip, and how people work together will have an effect on that. And then it starts to come together in that norming and performing stage.
And I think, Kim, to build on what you were saying as well, I think one of the things to be aware of is that this isn't just a team as a whole. As I said, if one person leaves that team, you may find yourself back at that forming. Even in a project team, if someone has to leave, they've gone to another job, you may find yourself, when someone else parachutes in and sort of joins that team, you may find yourself back at that stage, even though the majority of the team is still the same people, because there's a new dynamic. It may not happen. They may seamlessly slide in, but I still think there's a trigger point of, there is a little bit of forming, sussing out that person, understanding them understanding you. And then sorry, my cough is back here. Then that sort of manager laying out the task and how this person will fit into it again, and how they will bring to that team. So yeah, that's sort of, yeah, don't read too much into it. There is a little bit, but it's not the main focus. Okay, let's have a quick look.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want. Are you happy? Are you ready? Are you feeling?
I'm ready. My apologies, everyone. Can you go back one slide, Judith?
I
was ready to roll. I was having a chat with Richard. I took my standing desk and put it up, and my whole computer just gave up on me. So I'm back.
All right, I will, please do. This is Kim's fun speciality area, so I will leave you in her hands as well.
No, because what it is I was just thinking about this morning, actually, before we started the call, which is my boss and I joke that for my team, we've never had, I haven't had a stable team in like 2 or 3 years. As soon as we get to that performing stage, somebody leaves, somebody goes on maternity leave, something happens from the strategy of the organization, and the project shifts or the strategy shifts. It's as soon as I think, okay, we're getting there and we're going to really start to make progress, something changes, and that's not unique to me. Just this week, I realized that as the team was starting to form, one person is leaving, and I have to now start to recruit for another person. That will change the dynamics of the team. Knowing that helps me to figure out what my management strategy is. If I didn't know it and I just kept doing the same thing, it's not going to help get us out of that dip. So I want you to think about where your team is, and this could be your team that you manage. It could be a team, a project team that you are part of. Think about a team that you are currently in. And what I want you to do is, Francesca's going to get us into groups, and we're going to, in your groups, you're going to pick one or two of these phases: forming, storming, norming, performing, or mourning. Sometimes it's called adjourning. And what I want you to do is to answer these questions. And I'm going to drop them in for you so that you have them. So the first question I want you to ask are, what are the telltale signs that I'm in that phase? I'm in that stage. I know I'm informing because this is happening. When you're in that phase, how does it feel? What is the climate like? Meaning, are people happy all the time? Do you dread going to that meeting because you know like there's going to be conflict? How do you think the team members feel? And then finally, how should you as a manager respond when you find your team in this situation? So just to recap, you're going to get into groups. I want you to be thinking now, oh, my team that I manage or that I'm part of is currently in this stage. And then when you get into your groups of about 3 or 4 people, try to form some consensus of, let's talk about this one. It may not be the exact one that you were thinking of, but let's talk about this stage and answer all of these questions. There's a space in your workbook to do that. It's on page 31 in your workbook to start to write it down. You will have about 10 minutes. So if you finish one stage, feel free to move on to the next priority stage for your group. I want you to start thinking about what it means to you when you're in the stage, and then as a manager, what can you do about it? Okay. All right, we'll see you back here in 4 minutes.
Here we go.
Face. Trick, couple facilitation tricks. This is not what this workshop is about, but in another world, Judith and I train our e-facilitation course, and it's one of the things we love to do. If you put people in small groups, they will turn their cameras on, and then they're stuck when they come back. They can't turn their cameras back off. Haha. Second trick is technology will fail if it can, like it did for me today, which is why we have, when at all possible, 2 trainers and a fabulous producer, so we have backup. So those are 2 little impromptu facilitation or meeting tips for you. Always have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, because if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. But we're back. We are back and ready to go. So how did those conversations go for you? Was it easy to see where your team currently is on the development phases? Did it take you a while to think, I wonder where we are, or was it very obvious where your team was?
We were in our group, we were talking a bit after we went through the updates on where all of our teams were. We talked more about that our teams are kind of in all of these all at once for us, and that we were thinking of it as we looked at it as more of a cycle within our own teams instead of the line, just because you have new staff come on board and you're merging a team, and then there's suddenly a new strategy or restructure at your organization. And so these things are kind of in flux, and anytime there's a change or a shift, you kind of have to go back to the beginning and constantly go through a cycle. So today we were discussing a sort of one point in time, but then we got into this discussion about a cycle at the end. And I know for me, that's how I'm feeling right now.
So when I say, where is your team? I don't mean, where is your team in 2021? I mean, where is your team today at this point in time? As I mentioned, I just before we got on announced that one of my team members is not coming back from maternity leave, which means that we are now going to be throwing the team into a whole new dimension. And it's just acknowledging that. And sometimes we don't acknowledge it. Yes, it is not necessarily a step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is very much cyclical. One of the best things about 4 years ago, Humentum went through a 3-way merger. Lingos, Mango, and Inside NGO merged to become Humentum. And one of the best things that our leadership did for about a year was say, this is going to be uncomfortable. We are now going through the forming and the norming, and it doesn't take 3 weeks. It's going to take a while. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable. My mantra for about 2 years was change is hard. With my team, and I meant it. And so sometimes just acknowledging that is what you need. But there's more to it than just acknowledging it.
Kim, Kim, just to jump in on that one as well, because I think one of the points that I think it was Lyndall that was making there, just to be aware that in an organization, you may be part of different working groups and different project groups, as well as your team. So there is a most likely you are going to be experiencing different stages of this in multiple teams. So you could be in the forming in one team, the norming in another, and then absolutely performing in another. So it is trying to balance all of that and understand it. Sorry, Kim, back over to you.
Yeah, so this is in some ways a different viewpoint of a different way of looking at this life cycle. So you can see these are some of the questions that you all answered, and I'm interested to hear which ones you focused on and if this resonates with the conversation that you had. You can see in forming, you're breaking the ice. It's very cordial. People are polite to each other. There's kind of this feeling of, oh, there's a new person, or this is a new project. How is this going to work? It very quickly, or maybe not so quickly, can get into conflict, some resistance, because we have individual personalities coming together. So you may have people who naturally take up a lot of space and have loud voices. You may have people who are resistant to change. We'll talk later this week about all of the different types of personalities that emerge when change occurs. People can get defensive, competitive, frustrated. All of those kind of not of our best personalities can come out. And then there's more consensus that starts to form as you're doing this norming. Clarity around roles and responsibilities. There is more order, and then you get to, okay, I know Jackie's good at this. I'm gonna, this is her strong suit. She's gonna be doing this. Judith is good at this. I'm gonna be making sure that she's the one who's doing this part of the team. And then you're getting into the performing. Look at the bottom layer, the team leader actions, because this is you're putting on your team leader hat. These are all of the different things that you can do. Thoughts or questions about what you see here on the bottom row? You'll see even some language you've already been using in the forming stage. Be directive. That's a time for us to be more directive. Who's doing what? What is the role of each person and the role or the goal of the team? What are the different objectives? We talked about that the other day, right? It even says present the stages to acknowledge, as I mentioned, that some of this stuff will happen, that there may be feelings of uncomfortableness or of conflict, and that's normal. In the second phase, when you're storming, that's where you're getting into feedback, active listening. That's where you're really starting to try and develop relationships, even outside of your relationship with individuals. There needs to be relationships between team members and using your coaching skills to help make that happen. As you norm and you're putting together some guidelines and some parameters for the team, you're doing your delegation skills that we talked about the other day. You may be stepping back a little bit and just watching the team dynamics, but you taking yourself out of the team so that they can kind of step in and do some self-running and do their own collaborative work. That's where you're celebrating the wins and you're letting them kind of work out their own challenges, so that when you get to performing, you are really truly delegating. You're really just looking for monitoring progress, and you're that kind of blocker. That's when you can put your leader hat on, you're talking to them about vision, and you're just being if they have any barriers, you are helping to remove those barriers because they are a well-functioning team. thoughts or questions on this? Lyndall, yeah.
So one of the things that came up for us in our conversation when we were talking about performing is that very often as teams kind of hit that performing stride and you are seen organizationally as kind of dependable and functioning and like putting out product, that you get more and more and more kind of requests coming in or assigned your way because you are performing at that high level. And so as a manager, the importance of kind of being a gatekeeper and kind of fencing out around your team, like both those priorities, but what maybe needs to get sent somewhere else and what really falls within your remit to kind of protect from that overworking and overburdening that happens when you are doing things well and that's being recognized.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I call them lovingly, the higher achievers become the absorbers. Some people just absorb work. People ask them and they just take it on. Sometimes people do it because they like control and they think they can do it well. Sometimes they like to do it because they just get really interested in things. And your job as a manager and as a team leader is to allow the new things to come in that help you to achieve your goal and your vision as a team, and then block the things that are just noise. Like, oh, yes, we're good at it, but that's not really going to help. And that's where those goals and objectives come in. Because if you don't know what your goal is, you don't know what you should be prioritizing and what you should be gently saying no thank you to. And yes, when you get to performing, your job as a manager is less about the directing and the helping to create, the everyday task level. And it's more about being that blocker and being that gatekeeper and protector for your organization. That's also how you're going to build that trust, because people are going to see that you truly care about them. I know you're good at this, but it's probably not the best use of your time because it's not going to help you achieve your personal goals and because I care about your work-life balance. So here's my last question for you on this. How does the fact that we are now working in a hybrid or a remote work environment impact the development of your team? If you are onboarding a new team member, or if you're putting together a brand new team from scratch to start on a project, how is it going to impact, especially probably the forming, the storming, and the norming stages? What do we think? In the chat, unmute. Have you seen this happen in the last year? Yes, Linda says it makes it a lot more complicated. I would agree with that. Some of this, as we've already talked about, which is even in your one-to-one relationships, how do you know if people are struggling? Sometimes the conflict is easier to be hidden if it's in Zoom meetings you're not part of, or if it is in direct messages that you're not part of. So the conflict and the personalities become harder to see, they're less visible, and then it's harder for you to course correct. Oftentimes, the first time you hear about conflict, maybe when it reaches a level of gossip or morale, challenges to morale, and then it's kind of gone later than ideally you would have liked it to have gone, before you could just kind of course correct immediately. So having those individual relationships of trust where people feel comfortable coming to you before it becomes a real big problem is important. Acknowledging it, saying, hey, we're about to go through some turbulent times and we're not seeing each other every day. So what are we going to do about it? What is our collaboration agreement? You'll see it here on the slide. How are we going to work together? What are we all agreeing together? Are some ways that can help, but I'm open to other ways that you have seen work for you and your teams too. Okay, I counted to Judith's 10. We're going to move on. Here's what it is. This is a great framework for you. I don't think it probably was brand new information for you, but my key points are this. This is not a linear process. It's normal. It happens. And it's going to be almost the background for you as you're thinking about developing your team and all the other things we talk about today. And the next thing that Jude's going to take us through is thinking about what are the characteristics of an effective team. When we get to that performing stage, really, what are the specific characteristics that we are trying to achieve?
I got a bit worried that my mute wouldn't go off. Kim, you might have been stepping in for me at that point. We're just challenging each other today. Yes, let's talk about the characteristics of an effective team. What does that even mean? Everyone in the chat, things on the keyboards. What do you think the characteristics are of an effective team? Single words, bullet points, whatever you want to put. You could put more than one. There are more than one. There's not one winning solution. Yep, Skylar, brilliant. Yep, constant honest feedback. Clear goals. Yep. Collaboration. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clear direction. So we've got a sort of clarity, the communication and communication to bring about that clarity. Dana, but that's a great point. Having the same vision. Do we all believe, are we all working towards the same thing? And yeah, Tinele, mutual respect. Something I think that goes beyond the collaboration. So you are you sort of working together, but do you mutually respect each other? Is that underlying in the team? I like that. It's sort of, let me see, Jackie, ability to laugh together. Absolutely. Just to be able to share humor. And when times do get tough, being able to know that you can still have that sort of time and that fun with each other. Successes and failures, team trust. Trust, yes, my favorite word. Clear goal, direction, communication, accountability, respect, and trust. Beautiful list there, Angzolin. That's a really lovely list. Okay, I'm going to share with you, and all of those are applicable. And actually, what the list I'm about to share with you, I think sums up a lot of those in some clear steps that might help you. So let me actively share my screen. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if you can see PowerPoint presentation? Lovely. Okay. So yes, I mean, the imagery, we all want to be swimming in the same direction. I actually, if I had my way, we'd go back to that, the initial image we used for the life cycle, Tuffman's life cycle, because I like the fact that all the fish would be different colors and different sizes, but actually we're all swimming in the same direction. So yeah, that's sort of a nice visual imagery. But let's look at those effective teams, and you may recognize from your list a lot of the same here. And I think one of a few that I saw, and I'll go through these in a minute, that I think underpin this is communication. Communication is key. Feedback is a part of that as well. In order to have any of this, there has to be good communication. So I think that one was quite a nice one to just underline those. That's why it's not outright called here, because I don't think you can have clear objectives without communicating those clear objectives in the right way. That's the point of it being clear. It's the communication of those objectives. So that's the first one. We talked about goals in the chat. Let me actually open the chat so I can start to sort of pinpoint against, it always closes when I'm sharing. So a few of you talked about goal setting, objectives was mentioned as well. So you need to, as a team, have some clear objectives. What are you all working towards? Not only individually, but if you remember when we talked about objective setting, do they all feed up to a higher point? Remember that cycle, that big picture we talked about? Does it all feed back up to the organizational or the team's objectives as well? A good decision-making process is absolutely essential. And in a minute, I'm going to talk you through dysfunctions of a team. So how it can go a bit wrong, what happens when a team is dysfunctional. And not having a good decision-making process means that nobody knows where the line sits. Who makes the decision? How do I input into that decision? And if I don't know any of that, I'm not really going to be invested in any decision that's made. So we need to have a clear and good decision-making process. Trust. We've had that a few times. So let me go back to the checks. There were a few there. So I think this sort of sits with Linda, your one around the supportive. You talked about that. Kane, you talked about team trust as well as Angelo. So there's a few there that talk, that cover that cooperation, support, and constructive conflict. So are you able to have those challenging conversations that lead to essentially number B, making a decision, going in a specific direction based on that discussion? Thing is quite interesting. Now, recently we did a different Kim and I actually attended a management course our organization is doing. And which was very weird to be training it and then being sent on one as well. But we're having a bit of fun with it. And one of the things they talked about is the idea of contracting. Now, I'm not personally a fan of necessarily always going down that line, but I think the concept is right. Think back to the RACI. What are the roles on the team? Who is responsible for what, and where does the leadership lie? Nina, you put the last one there as accountability. This is accountability. Where does that sit? A shared vision was mentioned, mutual sort of, and having that. How is the leadership sharing that vision and making? So we need to be clear about that. E is really interesting because a lot of what we've talked about up to now is ourselves and our team. But how? Sure, I understand. Oh, Siri apparently doesn't understand. So she does butt in a lot, doesn't she? So think about the fact that what about how your team that you're part of interacts with other teams? The team I sort of work with, the team I manage, is what I call an internal service team. We work directly with customers and we work directly with others, but also a lot of what we do is serving the rest of the organization. We create the learning that they are then going to take to others, or provide the learning systems and the platforms and the tech that go there. So we need to work very well with other teams. And how do those teams perceive us? How do we engage with them? How do we network? You can't be a silo effective. So you've got to think about that. And the final one is, well, how do you know if all of that's working? How do you know if you are effective? How do you go through all of those elements? How are you tracking that? How are you calling each other up on those? And how are you saying, yes, we are effective? What does effectiveness look like for your team? And agree that. Before you start agree what how you're going to determine if you are being successful as a team. Any questions on that? Because I'm going to take you to the dysfunctions, the fun part. Any questions? No? Okay. You can still put them in the chat and I will pick them up as we go through. I want to move on to something by a certain individual called, and I've got to get his name, I've been practicing saying it, Patrick Lencioni. I like that name. So Patrick Lencioni created something called the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And this was actually only recently, it was in the early 2000s, around 2002, that he put this together. He wrote this book called The Dysfunctions of a Team. And there are certain elements that he said lead to these dysfunctions. So the first one, oh, wow, absence of trust. Well, Kim and I have been saying this the whole way through the course. Trust, trust, trust. And the absence of trust is the basic loss and basic dysfunction. That is the most, if you look at this, the reason this is a pyramid is because these build on top of each other. So note that absence of trust is the foundation of that dysfunction. And the consequence of that is invulnerability. In other words, I am impenetrable. I will not show any vulnerability. I will not be open to others. I am solid. I am a rock. You can't break me. But that shows no vulnerability, no openness to the others, and being able to work together, as well as share your own thoughts and how you believe your opinions on things. Absence of trust. Fear of conflict. So one of the things that I mentioned in the characteristics is good decision-making process. And in the second one was a trust and cooperation and constructive conflict. But if you have a fear of conflict, you can never have those disagreements that finally lead to a solution. It's just one person's opinion taking you to where you need to be, which creates artificial harmony. We all just pretend we get along. Yeah, they're great. Yeah, I like them. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, that's a great idea. And inside you are like, what? So I think there's this sort of, you've got to look out for that. Who are the absent head nodders sort of in the group that just sort of go along because they just want, they don't want to cause a stir, but actually inside they have some valuable opinions and some feedback. One of the things to be aware of in this, and I sort of adding this in a bit, but done a lot of work with introverts and extroverts, and one of the things to be sort of aware of here is allowing the space for those that are potentially introverts to share and be part of that conflict in a way that they are comfortable with. So it's not necessarily a fear of conflict, it's just making sure that you take that into account. A lack of commitment. Now, this is not a lack of commitment in regards to they just don't want to do the job. Actually, what we're referring to here is a lack of commitment to a decision. Again, I'm not committed to it. I didn't want to bring up that I conflict with the opinions of the group. Therefore, I'm just going to nod along. But now I'm not really committed or invested in that decision. So I have a lack of commitment to that. And then that leads to ambiguity because, well, who is going to carry out the final decision? Who is going to take forward that decision that's been made? Who's actually invested in doing that? Which then leads us to an avoidance of accountability. You can see how they're stacking up on top of each other. This is sort of a nice pyramid of how they build up. So we have an avoidance of accountability because no one was invested, no one was willing to take this on, and they don't see it anymore as something that's to do with them. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. So we end up with low standards because no one is being held accountable for that work taking place or being done in the right way. Okay. And finally, an inattention to results. I'm just not invested, therefore I'm just going to get on with my work, and whether the team achieves their goals, okay, whatever. And then it just becomes about your individual work and what you're doing. Zainab, I see a question there. When there has been a history of conflict, when a person is honest, artificial honesty, but also that work is some peaceful thoughts. Interesting. So I think that and I'm going to get my words right here, I think there is an ability to agree to disagree, but agree to have a final outcome. And that's why if you go back to the, sorry, if you go back to the characteristics of the team, point D, clear roles, responsibilities, and leadership, as well as B, being a good decision-making process, what you end up with there is that everybody has input into that decision. The conflict can occur, let the conflict happen. But everybody knows that their voice will be heard, but someone has to make that ultimate decision. And we need to buy into that. We need to agree to that. So there's something there around agreeing to disagree and agreeing that someone has to have that final say there. It's not about the artificial harmony is recognizing, I mean, how many times have you disagreed with a friend? But it doesn't ruin the friendship. You still sort of go on you sort of still go out for the day or something like that. In some ways, this is what we're saying. We're still committing to the decision, but I want to know that my opinion's been heard, that I'm not convinced.
Judith.
But I recognize for the good of the team, we need to move this forward. Okay.
Judith.
Oh, yes, Kim.
So 100% agree. And just to add on to that, because this is something we're going to get into when we talk about change, is what we don't want to have happen, Zainab, is to give space for the passive resistors, because there are so many passive resistors. And there's nothing, conflict can be okay if done right. And that's a skill set in and of itself. It's the word artificial here and the fear of conflict that can lead to space for that passive resistance. When I'm pretending that I'm going along with this peaceably, but I'm really not. One of Judith and I's colleagues' favorite things to say is, I will put my argument out there. I will fight in my corner as much as I can. And as soon as the decision is made by the decision maker, I will respect that person and I will get in line and I will never speak of it again. That's a great way to have, that's a great dynamic to have. And it's hard to get to, actually. And that would be one of the what I would consider an effective team, much more than this dysfunctional.
Yeah, and I think if I build on that a bit, I think one of you, when you go back to setting up the characteristics of the effective team, it helps you overcome a lot of these. And actually having that sense of dynamics in the team. So remember we talked, you could have ground rules within your team. What does everyone agree to? Do you agree that you are going to have those discussions? You are going to allow for that conflict to happen? But what happens when we get to that point that a decision needs to be made? If everybody actually is in agreement on those rules as a team, then it's easier to have genuine harmony over a decision, even if I don't agree with it, because it stands within the rules that we ourselves have signed up to. Okay, let's carry on. So now let's look at what successful teams look like. And you can imagine, I can always already say, yes, create trust. That's the first one. Successful team is about creating that trust. And we have talked many times about this. One of the things that I was reading this morning, and we're going to post the link into you, was around, if I can share it if people are interested, I'll post the Lencioni one in a minute, was around psychological safety. And that has changed drastically in the team, because and nowadays psychological safety means being that vulnerability we talked about and having that trust, but it also means that respecting each other's boundaries and where they need to be. So I'll post a little bit about that, but it's something to consider. What is the psychological safety of your team that enables them to trust you and trust other people? Value conflict. Remember those ground rules. Make it actually an accepted part of your team's actions. We will have conflict. We will have debate. We will have discussion. Use the terms debate and discussion. You don't have to use the term conflict. It's just, I suppose, a clearer term. But debate and discussion. We will have debate and discussion as a team. Okay. Encourage commitment. That's that second stage. We will have debate and discussion, and then we will commit to a final decision. Promote accountability, ownership. Of course, as the manager, you are at that top. It does all come back to you. I know that. And we do hold that ultimate accountability in some ways. You know, when the team is failing, or sort of the direct report is not getting it right, it does come to you, and you get asked, why is that happening? I've been there, and it's difficult, but we don't want to discourage accountability from the team. We want them to feel like this is their project, they're invested in it. And a term we used a lot is dare to fail. Make it acceptable to fail, that it's okay to try something and for it not to work out, and actually that it's okay to own that. Share the outcomes of that failure, a lesson learned. Finally, absolutely celebrate results. We have what we call a kudos channel here at Humentum in Slack, where if we get some good feedback or someone has done something particularly well, we post that into that kudos channel, and everybody can sort of emoji applaud and write comments, and it's just a way of generally sharing that. I want to talk about your role. Some very clear steps for you to follow. Creating trust is about you needing to go first and be that vulnerable person. They need to know it's okay. It's hard. Managers have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, and one of those responsibilities is being vulnerable. Look for the conflict. Remember I said make it okay in the sort of the rules of the team for debate and discussion. Look for where there are differences. If you're aware that someone has a different idea, say to them, you know, what about that other idea you were talking about? Force clarity and closure. Again, that rules, you set the rules, you pick that up. Confront difficult issues. Okay? So difficult issues. So what it's saying there is people don't want to be held accountable. So figure out why. What is it that's holding them back? What is it that's stopping them? And I said about that dare to fail, that could very well be an issue that is holding someone back. And finally, focus on the collective outcomes of the team as well. Celebrate as a team. If you can celebrate the team's success or the team that you are part of, that creates, if we go back to that fear of conflict, it goes back to actual harmony, not artificial harmony, because we all share in each other's success. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's a lot to digest, and I'm hoping my colleague is going to post in a link for you, because it should be there. So we're going to post a link in. I obviously don't read it now, please. We don't want you turning off and sort of clicking and just disappearing from us for a while. But this is a nice article that really sums these up quite well. It's brief, it's not too long an article, but it will give you a bit more information around those dysfunctions. So please do take a moment. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? I've got a minute, and then I'm going to hand over to Kim, who is going to talk a little bit more about leadership situations. Okay, Kim, let's go on to more to do with teams. Let's look at these teams again.
Okay, can you unshare your screen?
Yeah.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everyone to turn off their cameras, because we're just going to take a bit of a stretch break. Because it is a lot. So shake it out. Stretch to the sky, stretch to the floor, shake it out. It's a lot of new information. It's good new information. I hope you use it. But we just need to acknowledge that it's a lot. Okay, come back to me. Come on back. Because we're going to try and tie this all together with a concept that it should be familiar to you by now. And it's truly one of my favorite frameworks, because I think it's a nice way of thinking about really at the very foundational level, what is your job as a manager? And it's the situational leadership framework that we shared. Oh gosh, now, was it earlier this week or last week at this point? So this should be looking, the Hersey and Blanchard situational leadership should be looking fairly familiar to you. For me, this is the framework of, this is my job as a manager. My job is to move individual people along this line, from needing a lot of direction to more coaching and supporting, to be able to get them to just where I can delegate to them because they have a high level of skill and a high level of confidence. And then being able to throw them back into, with a stretch assignment, to something that's a little outside of their comfort zone. They have to learn new skills, or they have to practice using new knowledge, where I have to get back into directing with them. And remember, this is at the task level. That's how you help people grow. And it's how you help to demonstrate to your direct reports that you see them. You see who they are, what they're good at, what they're struggling with, what their goals are, so you can help to move them forward. So the question is, how does this apply to teams? And does it apply to teams? I would argue that yes, it really is, does apply to teams. And this is your constant struggle of balancing between being supportive, but also not micromanaging, and knowing when to do that. So we know now that teams kind of have this cyclical flow of how they work together. All of the individual personalities on a team, how do they work together with the roles and the responsibilities, the team norms, the team rules, to get to that part of being an effective team. at the very detailed level, at the task or the goal level, how do we know at any given moment what our role should be? Should I be, the directing manager to help get that team moving? Or should I be very hands-off and say, here's your goal, let me know if you have a problem and I can block for you. So what we're going to do right now is we have 3 case studies in your workbook that you're going to be thinking through and saying, the manager in this case study, in this story, where were they on this situational leadership path? Was it the right thing to do? What would I do? That's what I want you to do right now. I'm going to put some instructions in the chat. So the first thing is what you're going to do is you're going to get into your groups. You're going to review the 3 case studies in your workbook. There are 3, they're not long, and they're on workbook pages 33 to 35. So they're not long. Then you're going to discuss the questions that you see in the workbook for your designated case study. And what Francesca is going to do is she will name your group. So you will be either looking at the one related to budget, the one related to local needs, or the one related to conference. You're going to have about 15 minutes. Francesca, that's a change, 15 minutes. And if you have time, if you've already finished your designated case study, talk about the other ones, because they're we'll be debriefing together about all of them. Now, let me just look very quickly at the questions. So the questions you're going to be talking about is, what style or approach has the manager adopted? We're talking about that situational leadership. Are they being directive? Are they delegating, etc.? How would you react if you were on their team? What are the pros and the cons of the approach that the manager chose? And how else might they have approached the problem? Okay. So we're going to start to put this all together and be thinking about, in real life situations, what do others do and what would you do? Okay. And then we'll come back and we'll see how it goes.
All right, everybody, here we go. 15 minutes.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I want to hear how it went, but I have a few questions for you as you go. And maybe the chat is the best way to do it, unless, as always, you're welcome to take yourself off mute and ask a question or share with the group. My first question is, when you were reading through the case studies or the scenarios, what kind of management style did you feel resonated the most with you? As in, which one would you most likely have been to take? Would it have been the directive? Would it have been the delegating? Would it have been somewhere in the middle? What did you find yourself leaning towards? Patrick, you liked the directive. Is that also how you like to be managed?
I would say so. I like that, not like so micromanaged, kind of that level of directive, but to the point where, this is what we need to do. This is what our end goal needs to be. This is how we need to achieve it. This is your responsibility. So I guess it's more of a hybrid than maybe I initially thought, directive and delegation, but definitely more on the directive side, just because I like that clear set of guidelines of this is what eventually we need to get to. How you do it is up to you. Okay. So if we were to look at the situational leadership chart, it sounds maybe more like directive to coaching. Yeah. So you're saying these are our goals and this is how we get there, but I'm going to be a little bit more supportive and how we do it. And I think Lyndall, you're probably saying the same thing. The border between directive and delegating is probably in that supporting coaching line of things. Anyone else? Okay, Nini, you like to
to sometimes say, this is how we do it, but then opening it up. And I think there was one case study, one scenario where they were saying that, right? I want you to go away and come up with an ideas, and then I will take it into account and come up with the final plan. And the group that talked about that case study, how did you find that went? Was that a good strategy?
That was the local needs one. I think overall we liked the kind of idea around getting a lot of ideas together so that you can pick from objectively the best one. But we also kind of identified a couple cons with that scenario where if you have a really passive team that just kind of nod their heads and agree with you, if you present your idea first, you're likely to just get a lot of, no, your idea sounds good, let's just do that. And you may not necessarily get a better idea.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And Nini's saying here in the chat, the last scenario where the manager was being very, doing a lot of delegating, saying, I've talked with Val has experience, you guys are going to go away. You just let me know when I can support you. Yes, in the right circumstance, staff will feel motivated. In the wrong circumstance, staff will feel overwhelmed, right? So I think my big takeaway here is just like using situational leadership when you're having a one-to-one relationship means you need to understand who the person is, where they are at the task level, and how to move them forward. Understanding who the team is, where they are for that particular project or task, and how to move them forward will help you to adjust what your own bias is as a manager. Judith, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to type because I realized time, but it was actually what Patrick was saying. One of the greatest pieces of advice for a manager is to always give your opinion last. If you are asking for opinions, never be the first to offer it, because you do get those head nods. And where you have passive people, what you can do is you can make it a task for the team to go away, to write down what their opinion is, and then submit it. You can even do it anonymously so that you present them all to the team, and the team then have to say what ones they like the best with anonymity there. Just some ideas.
Yep. So I'm going to put our final closing question in here. We have 2 more sessions, if you can believe it. Tomorrow, we're going to be really focusing on embracing the challenges, where what I lovingly call our difficult people, and also all of the other challenges that as a manager you are facing. And then on Friday, we're going to be bringing it all together. So we do still have some more time. So my final question to you is this: a conversation we are not having yet that I'm eager to explore. I don't want you to walk away on Friday with a big challenge that you were hoping to have talked about and not being able to get to that. So a conversation that we are not having yet that I'm eager to explore. And while you answer that question, I'm going to just wrap up some of this situational leadership to say, one other kind of thought to leave you with is, how does this relate to both remote management, and how does it relate to the conversation we've been having around inclusivity? What voices should we be including as you're deciding what your management approach is for your team? Who should be in the decision-making table? Whose perspectives should you be asking? Who should you be pushing forward with those stretch assignments? And how do we do that in a remote environment? So those are all kind of new lenses that we're all practicing putting on as we think through these things. Dealing with conflict, difficult conversations. Okay, so we can certainly weave that in tomorrow. I think the active listening and the feedback are the skills you're going to use. It's more of the situational of how do you actually apply that. So if you haven't already answered the question, please feel free to. If not, we are at time. Thank you all for joining us again, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great evening, especially I know it's late for some of you.
Thank you.